Okay then everyone, let's get started. So hi, hope everyone's well. Welcome to our Xenogenics Pardot list creation training session. My name's Sarah Hill. I'm one of the Pardot at Xenogenics. And I work with our customers to ensure that they get the best return on investment in Pardot. And I often work with marketing teams and also individuals to train them on how to use Pardot and get the best from it. And one of the areas that I find is most critical as a marketing person, and specifically with using Pardot, is list building and managing our data. So that's what we're going to cover this morning. So let's get into it now. Okay, so a Pardot list is quite similar to a CRM or a Salesforce definition of a marketing campaign. They're typically groups of prospects. So the kind of prospects that you want to contact with your sales and marketing information. Obviously your lists can be used to send your list emails, your bulk emails, your drip programs, your engagement studios, all of your nurture programs. That's the kind of thing that we're using with our lists. And our prospects can be members of and added to an unlimited number of lists. So there's no limit in the amount of lists they can be on. Any list that we create can be used as a suppression list, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But we can also use, and one of the more interesting uses for Pardot lists is to use them to segment your data, to give you a real granular view of the data that you've got. So if you're interested in having a look at how many people you've got in a certain segment, who they are, that's possible to do in Pardot. And you can also download them as CSV files and really get into the detail offline if you want to. Okay, so there are really two types of Pardot lists, and they are called static and dynamic lists. So a static list is really a list that you create and then you manually add your prospects to that list. There are loads of ways in which you can add your prospects, and that's going to form part of the kind of demo bit that I'm going to do in a minute. The second type of list is called a dynamic list, and that allows us to create a list of prospects that's tailored to the specific criteria that we set. And this is something that continually changes. So your prospects are added to the list and taken off the list as they match and unmatch from the criteria that you've set. So for example, you might wish to create a dynamic list of customers that have purchased from you in the last 6 months. So once they passed out of that 6-month period, they then come off the list. So it's constantly changing. One of the terminologies that you will hear is suppression lists. And that's not actually a type of list, but it's a use for the list that you can create. So a suppression list would basically mean you're sending out an email, but there's a group of people that we don't want to receive this email. So you might create a list of customers, competitors, and we'd use that as a suppression list. When creating a list, we can also create a test list, and that's done by just ticking a checkbox. And these are static lists that can include up to 100 prospects. And we use the test lists to basically test our emails and our email templates before we send them out. And it means that when we test the emails, we can see exactly what our prospects are going to see when we receive the email. Okay, so what are the similarities and differences between the two types of list? You can't manually add or remove a prospect to a dynamic list. The lists are refreshed on a regular interval, so it's around every 10 minutes that they're refreshed. And so your prospects are, as I said earlier, coming in and out of that list as they're matching and unmatching your criteria. So because of this, and because you can't manually add, you wouldn't ever see a dynamic list as an option when you're importing data or when you're adding from your CRM. You can, however, manually add to a static list. That's the whole point of a static list. You can use both types of list for both your email preference center and also for use in your list emails and your nurture programs and engagement studios. And you can convert a dynamic list to a static list. So if you wanted to take a snapshot of your list at a particular point in time, you can do that, and it will then convert itself into a static list. But you can never convert a static list into a dynamic list because you don't have the criteria there. The two things are different. Another feature that you can use in Pardot is splitting a list. So if you wanted to split a list into one or more further lists with either your data split equally between those lists, or you can select a percentage of data which you want to put into each list. That's something that's possible to do, but both of these results would give you a static list. So if you're splitting a dynamic list, it would give you a static list, and if you're a static list, you'd get a static list as well. Okay, so let's jump into Pardot and have a look around at the main part. I'm running this demo today in the classic view of Pardot. I just find it gives a bigger screen here for you to be able to view on a webinar. I'll show you what the Lightning app in Pardot looks like. So your menus are different. So some of you might have this view when you're looking at Pardot, and some of you might have this view. Just so you know, it all does the same thing. So let's look at creating a static list then. So to create a list, we're going to run over to the menu, go to the marketing menu, segmentation and lists, and click on lists. And that brings up a list of all the lists. And here we are able to add a list. We go to the same place no matter what we're filling in here. So if we're making a dynamic list or a static list, it's exactly the same screen. So we're going to name our list. Let's just put it test Pardot training. And we can add our list to a folder as per however we want to organize things. You're also able to add a tag to all your members of this list. So if you use tags for segmentation purposes, you're able to add the tag here. As I mentioned earlier on, this is a checkbox here where we can turn this into a test list if we wish. And you'll notice if you do turn it into a test list, you can't then click and make it dynamic. This is the checkbox to make a dynamic list. We'll come back to that later on. We also have the option here to archive our list. So what this basically does is clean up the number of lists that are shown in our list table. So if we put a date in the future, maybe we wanted to put it for a month in the future, at that point, this list would no longer show up in our table. You wouldn't be able to add prospects to it or use it for list emails, but it will still run any automations that are based on that list. So it's your own choice on your organization whether you need to add in any archive dates here. The other options we've got here are to make this a public list. So that would mean that it shows up, if we tick that box, it would show up in our email preference center, and that would allow our customers to opt in or out of that list themselves. And this here would, final checkbox would allow us to make that visible in the CRM. So if we want our salespeople in Salesforce to be able to add people to a list, we tick that box here, or if we want to add them to the list from a campaign in Salesforce. Okay, so once we're happy with that, we're going to select create list, And here we go, our list's created, but we've got no prospects in there at the moment. So there are quite a few different ways in which we can add our prospects. I'll show you a few here now. Our first option would be to add a prospect from a prospect record. So let's go over and find one of me in here. This is just one of my many test accounts that I use. And what we're going to do when we're looking at our prospect record is scroll over to the lists tab at the top here, click on lists, and that will give us a list of all the lists that we're a part of. And then if we click on here, we can find a list, click on it, and that member has now been added to the list. So this Sarah Hill will now be a member of that list. Okay, we can also upload lists into Pardot that will automatically add our members to the list. So the way we're going to do that is go to our admin menu over here, go to import and click on prospects. And I've already uploaded a list earlier on while I was practicing, so I'll cancel that one out. So what we're going to do here is add to choose a file. So we're going to upload a file. You'll need to upload a CSV file for this, and I'll select on there. And then we need to click on this box to say that we agree to Pardot's permission-based marketing policy, which basically says, you will need to read it before you click the box, that you have permission to contact the people on that list. So once we've clicked on that list, we click next, and it finds our CSV file and it adds in our header row here and the first row of information in that list. It then gives us a list of fields which it is going to automatically map fields from the CSV file into Pardot. So this is our Pardot fields over this side. If we want to change these, so if you think, well, that's not first name, that's phone number, you can change them. Obviously, it's quite clever. It's done it all right for me here today. So I'm going to click on next. And what you'll need to do is add any members that aren't already in a campaign in Pardot to a campaign. So all of your prospects in Pardot need to be a member of a campaign, and that's the source campaign. So it will be tracked throughout the life of the prospect. So it really tells us where the first touch point of each prospect was. So if we click on the campaign, let's just choose campaign there. So we're going to add all of these members to this campaign. You've got two options here. So you can add all of them for the campaign, or you can add anyone that hasn't already got a campaign to that campaign. You can also add tags if we wish at this point. I'm going to click on next. So this gives us a few options now. The key one that we're doing here, because we want to add people to a list, is import prospects and add to list. There's another few options for you to have a look at there if you wish. And then we can select our list. So all of our lists come up here. We can just start typing in, choose our list. We can add more than one if we want to add them. If we want to add them to more than one list, we can do that. Then we're going to click next. And this is a review screen really that shows us what we're going to do, where we've mapped, if we've chosen to overwrite the fields, and gives us all of the information so we can confirm it before we continue. So I'm going to confirm and save that, and that will notify me by email when that's been uploaded and when prospects have subsequently been added to the list. Okay, another option for adding our prospects to lists is to add them from campaigns in Salesforce. So I've set up a little test campaign here to show you how it works. It's only got one lonely member, but the way we do it is from our campaign layout in Salesforce. We have a button here, add to Pardot list. And that takes us to a new screen where we can select to create a new list or to add to an existing Pardot list. And we can also, at this point, again, we'll need to add them to a campaign, the campaign that's most appropriate. Then when we're happy with that, we can choose if we want to overwrite the campaign again, but when we're happy with that, we're going to add to Pardot list. And again, this is going to send us an email when it's completed and those members have been added to the list. The other main ways of adding prospects to Pardot lists is using Pardot automation tools. If you're a user of Pardot, you will be quite familiar with a few of these tools. I'll just run through the main ones here. The first way of doing it that I'm going to mention is by using an automation rule. And to get to that, we would go to our marketing menu, automation and automation rules. So if we click on that, I have ready prepared us an automation rule for us to have a look at. And what this basically does is on a defined set of criteria, we're going to take an action. So as you'll see, there's lots of different criteria that we can use. So we can really use this as a good way of segmenting our data in pretty much any way we want to. And we can create new rules and new groups. And this is very similar to setting up a dynamic list. So when we go into that later on, I'll show you this in a little bit more detail. So here we can select our criteria and then we can select to add to list. That's just one of the actions we can take here. Now, the difference between using an automation rule to add someone to your list and using the dynamic list would be that once your prospects have matched the dynamic rule and been added to your list, they won't unmatch the rule and be removed from your list. So it's kind of once they're on, you'd have to manually delete them. And it will keep on running in the background up until the time where you pause the automation rule. So you can continually keep adding people to the list, but the difference is this won't take them off the list. Okay, so if you're happy with that, you would just click on Save Your Automation Rule and resume your automation rule to make it run, because whenever you save an automation rule, it always saves as paused, so they don't just automatically turn on. Okay, the next way that we can add using automations is by a segmentation rule. So we would go to our marketing menu again, segmentation and rules. And let's go into one I prepared earlier. So the difference with a segmentation rule, again, you'll see it's very similar, that you're adding fields and criteria to your rule, and then you're also adding an action, which is add to a list. Choose our list. So you'll see it's very similar, but the difference here is that a segmentation rule is a one-off, one-time action. So whereas an automation rule runs continuously until you pause it, a segmentation rule is saying, what is this data as of 9:50 on the 7th of April? And when you run that list, it will create you a one-time list. Okay, again, you can preview here, so you can have a look at all your different options, or you can click to run your segmentation, and that would add all your people into your list. The final way, using an automation rule would be, or using an automation, would be to use the completion action. So completion action is available on forms, form handlers, files, custom redirects, emails, and also on page actions. So the key with a completion action is it would only trigger when your prospect takes an action. For example, they fill in a form, or they click on your email, or they download a file. So let's have a quick look at that then. To get to a completion action, we need to open the content that you want your prospects to be interacting with. So let's take a form, for example. I was going to leave that because we haven't saved it. And I've created a form here that's a copy of the form that you all filled in to join this webinar today. And when we edit the form, we're going to go across to completion actions at the top. And we can then at the bottom add in a completion action, which is, there's remove from list, add to list up the top, and choose our list. So once we've saved that, when anyone completes that form, they're going to be added to the list. Okay, so that is the upshot of creating static lists. So now I'm going to move on and have a look at a dynamic list. So we go to this in exactly the same way as we did the other creating the static list. We're going to go to marketing, segmentation and lists. So let's click on that, add a new list. We'll call this dynamic list, that'll do. Again, we can add to a folder, but the key here is we're going to click on dynamic list. And as you'll notice, when you click on dynamic list, you can no longer click on email test list. And also our add to CRM visible has disappeared at the bottom. Okay. Oh, I've obviously already got a dynamic list. So as you'll see, it's very similar to all of the automations that we've just been looking at, and you'll be adding rules in much the same way. So the options that we've got is to match all or match any. So that is and or all. And we can add singular rules or we can add rule groups. So let's have a jump into adding a rule. There's so many different options here that you'd need to take some time to have a look. I'm not going to go through them all today. But let's say that we want to look at a list of prospects with a particular job title. Let's say we want their job title to contain manager. If you want to add more job titles in here, you can add the comma and add in CEO, for example. And you can keep going. I think you can add 1,000 letters here. And then if we wanted to add another rule, we can go in and we can say I want to include anyone that's industry is manufacturing. Okay, if we were happy with that, then we could add a rule group, and maybe we want our rule group because we want that to be an or option, so we're going to match any of these rules. We want a rule so their grade, if you're using grading, is greater than, probably A+ is not good, B-. And we're going to add in the form that they filled in was this one, and they've completed that form successfully. So once you're happy with your criteria that you've set here and you're confident that it's going to work for you, I would always select preview here. And when you select that, this is going to allow you to preview a list, and it will send you an email when it's done it of all of your prospects that add to this list and match this list. I would always double check it as a marketing person, and having worked with Pardot for a while, because it doesn't always do what you're expecting it to do. Pardot will only ever be right. It will never match someone to a rule where someone doesn't match, but there is a lot of area here, a lot of space for human error, and it's usually that I've added in the incorrect criteria. So a word of caution there is always check and double check. So once you've looked at your preview, you can go back to your building screen and change your rules. Make sure that your prospects are the ones that you're expecting. And then when you're happy with that, you run your rules. It does usually take a few minutes for your rules to run and for you to be able to use your list, depending on how big your database is in Pardot. Okay, so let's jump back now into the presentation. What I've done here is just give you a few examples of what we can use dynamic lists for. So for example, we could use it to look at what our most interested prospects are, who our most interested prospects are. So for this, we could be looking at, you know, they've been active with us. Their last activity was in less than 2 days ago here, and that they've got a high score, so that their score is greater than whatever is appropriate in our organisation based on however our scoring might be set up. We can also look if someone has a closed opportunity in the last year. So on this, we'd be looking at that they've got a one opportunity and that the opportunity close date was less than a year ago. So it's just different ways of using your dynamic lists. One way would be maybe to create a competitor list that you might want to use for suppression. And we could do this by using the email field and saying that the email contains their various domain names. One other use that is really great in Pardot, I think, is using your dynamic lists to clean up your data. So you can basically use this option of fields being empty. So you can check and change this field to, obviously we've used email, but we could use job title, name. And if you want to make sure that your data is as complete as it can possibly be, you can give yourself a list and then you can use use that list to complete the data. We can also go a little bit more complex. So we might want to look at customers or people who were customers that we've had an opportunity with but have never actually bought anything. And we can look at date ranges. So here we've got that the opportunity was lost and that the total sales is 0, so that these prospects have never bought anything from us. And that they were created more than 180 days ago, but less than 730 days ago. So that's really giving you a kind of overview of how, different ways that we can use dynamic lists, but it is one of the most useful tools in Pardot. A couple of things to know and a couple of points. If you do delete a list, it's the list that you're deleting. You aren't deleting any prospects that are on that list. Your list itself would just be added to the recycle bin and it won't affect any of your prospects. If you're using a dynamic list to send an email that you've scheduled, so that would be if today you decide that you want to send an email tomorrow at 10 o'clock, it would send to the prospects that are matched to that list at the time the email is sent. So it wouldn't, if you had 5 more people that added it overnight tonight, it would include those in the send. It wouldn't be just to the people that were on the list today. Also, if you're using a dynamic list for an engagement studio program and your prospect no longer matches the criteria, then they will be removed from that program. So they would stop progressing through the program altogether. Okay, and that was an absolute whistle-stop tour of Pardot. I have had a question come in, so let me have a quick look. So it says, in France, we have to respect GDPR rules, and in the UK too. So basically, we can't add contacts manually as they have to sign up themselves. Can we create emails asking them to subscribe to our list? Ramina, yes, you absolutely can. So I think the probably best way to do that would be to include a form on your email and have a completion action on the form. So they fill the form in and they're automatically added to your list. Hopefully that has answered your question. If it hasn't, then please get in contact with me after this and I can go through it in a bit more detail with you. Okay, well, that's, oh, hang on, we've just had another question come in. Oh, thanks, that's okay. So hopefully that's been really helpful. I'm aware that I talk quite fast, so hopefully you've got all of the points there. If anyone wants me to cover anything in a bit more detail, or you have any other specific questions for me, then please contact me. You've all got my details by now. Our next training session will be on Salesforce reports and dashboards, which will be on Thursday, the 23rd of April at 9:30 a.m. So if you're not already signed up for that and that's something that will interest you, please do sign up for that. And thank you everyone for your time, and I hope it's been useful. Thanks.